The Creature of the Deep. A short story written by Amber Wallace. The legend of the loch has been told for centuries, passed down to every fresh ear willing to listen. All the stories are the same, each told in different ways. But what if I had a story, one unlike any you've ever heard or read? Would you listen? Would you believe me? What I am about to tell you is a true story, and it begins deep beneath the loch, among the rocks, the coral, and the swaying seaweed. A creature so unbelievably large, so magnificent, that if you saw it, you'd think your eyes were playing tricks on you. The Loch Ness Monster, as she is known around the world, or Nessie, as many prefer to call her. Nessie lives deep in Loch Ness, far from the surface world, but every once in a while, she rises to peer at the world above. And if you were lucky enough, you might just catch a glimpse of her. That's where my story begins. It was a beautiful summer day in Scotland, and I was visiting my grandparents, who lived by the loch. They had their own private dock, where my grandfather kept a rickety old fishing boat that he often took out on the water. My grandfather loved spinning tales of a great serpent-like beast that lurked beneath the waves, and I spent countless hours on that dock, hoping to catch even the smallest glimpse of the creature. My brothers often teased me for wasting my time on a legend they believed wasn't real. "Oh, she exists, all right," grandfather would say, eyes twinkling. "I've seen her." And then he would tell the same story, the story of the night he was stranded out on the loch. A terrible storm had stolen his paddles and carried him miles from the nearest dock. When the storm finally passed, he thought he'd never make it back to land. Even though he was a strong swimmer, he knew the loch was no place to swim, especially so far from shore. Just as despair set in, something hit the side of his boat, nudging him forward. "You'd have thought the good Lord himself had reached down to guide me," he'd say. And when I finally reached land and turned to see what had saved me, I caught a glimpse of the beast as she slithered back into the depths. "Did you ever see her again?" I asked him once, eyes wide with wonder. Grandfather shook his head solemnly. "Alas, Cassie, I have not. Nessie is as mysterious as the loch itself." So, I waited. Down by the gravelly sand and green-blue waters, walking the shore, sitting on the dock, swinging my legs above the murky surface. I sighed deeply, staring down the length of the loch. Miles upon miles of water stretched before me. It would take a miracle to see anything, and my summer days were running out. I turned my gaze toward grandfather's rickety old boat. I had been told never to take it out alone, but the longer I looked at the loch, the stronger the urge grew. Maybe just a little trip. No one has to know, I told myself. I stood and peeked inside the boat. Taking a deep breath, I hopped in. I wasn't much of an expert when it came to boating, but I had watched grandfather start it up enough times to figure it out. I sat in the back and yanked the pull cord for the motor. After a few frustrating attempts, the engine finally sputtered to life. The boat lurched forward, and off I went, into the loch, in search of the unknown. I didn't go too far, just far enough that my grandparents' house was no more than a speck in the distance. Cutting the engine, I sat and waited. The loch was calm, the waves lazily lapping against the sides of the boat. Seagulls cried in the distance. I wasn't sure how long I had been floating there, but when I looked toward the horizon, the sky had begun to glow orange and red, the sun was just about to kiss the earth. "I guess I should head back," I murmured, reaching for the engine's pull cord. The engine rumbled and sputtered, but it wouldn't start. My heart pounded as I yanked the cord again, harder this time. Nothing. Again and again, I pulled until, with one final, desperate tug, the cord snapped. No, 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 this can't be happening. The boat rocked as I stood up in a panic. I was stranded. Help. Someone help me. I screamed into the empty loch, but I was too far for anyone to hear. I collapsed onto the seat, burying my face in my arms. How could I have been so stupid? Eventually, someone would realize I was missing. They would see that grandfather's boat was gone and come searching for me. But when? And how? Just as I began to dwell on the consequences, a shadow fell over me, and I heard the gentle trickling of water. I lifted my head and gasped. A long, powerful neck rose from the water, leading up to a massive head with smooth, grey-blue skin. Two glossy black eyes locked onto mine. The Loch Ness Monster, she was right in front of me. We stared at each other in silence. Nessie's head was enormous, with a round snout and large nostrils that snorted out tiny bursts of water. Two small fangs hung over her lower lip. Floppy ears twitched on her head, and between them sat two short, nail-like horns. But what struck me most was the thick mop of orange hair on top of her head, contrasting against the cool tones of her skin. My heart hammered in my chest. "Nessie," I whispered. The creature tilted her head, as if recognizing the name. I moved slightly, eager to get a closer look, but Nessie startled and disappeared beneath the surface. "No, wait," I called. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to scare you." Peeking over the edge of the boat, I saw her black eyes watching me from just below the surface. "Please come back," I coaxed. Slowly, Nessie lifted her head until she was level with me. She snorted out another misty breath, her warm air tickling my skin. Cautiously, I reached out and placed my hand against her snout. Her massive head trembled at my touch. I let out a delighted laugh, but the sound startled her, and she recoiled slightly. "I'm sorry," I giggled. "I didn't mean to scare you again." I held out my hand, and after a moment, Nessie moved forward. She sniffed my fingers, then snorted water onto them. I laughed. "I'm Cassie," I told her. She tilted her head again, then lifted her mighty neck and sniffed my entire body. Her floppy ears flapped happily when I laughed once more. For the first time, I truly took her in, this magnificent, breathtaking creature. She was beautiful in every way. Then, with a snort, Nessie dove beneath the surface. I watched in awe as she vanished into the depths, only to resurface moments later, launching herself into the air in a spectacular leap. Water showered over me as she crashed back into the loch. I squealed with delight. As the sky darkened, I realized my family must be searching for me. "Can you help me?" I asked, pointing toward the distant dock. Nessie tilted her head, then floated her body to the surface, pressing against my boat. Smiling, I carefully climbed onto her back. The second I was secure, she took off, gliding effortlessly across the loch. The wind whipped through my hair as she swerved and dove, making my heart race with pure joy. Before I knew it, we had reached my grandfather's dock. I slid off onto the splintering wood and turned back to Nessie with a grateful smile. "Thank you," I whispered. She flapped her ears in response, then, with one final glance, she backflipped into the water and disappeared beneath the surface. I never saw my friend again. Every summer since, I have searched for her. I've read stories, seen photographs, none of them truly capture her. But even if I told the world what she really looked like, no one would believe me. Then again, that's how all great stories go. But the question is, do you believe me?